Morning, welcome. My name is Brett Scharffs, and I'm the director of the International Center for Law and Religion Studies. And this breakout session is on the topic of human dignity, and in particular, a human dignity initiative where a group of us are working to try to persuade the United Nations General Assembly to adopt a resolution designating one day each year as Human Dignity Day. Our hope is that this will be June 6th, June 10th, which is a complement to December 10th, which is Human Rights Day. And today we have a group of panelists that I'm really eager for you to hear from and learn from. To my left is Katrina Lantos Swett, who is the chair of the Lantos Foundation and former chair of the United States International Religious Freedom Commission. And she is someone who cares deeply and is very knowledgeable on religious freedom issues. She currently serves as co-chair with Ambassador Sam Brownback of the Religious Freedom Summit, which will be holding its fourth annual summit at the end of January in 2024. And we encourage any of you who are interested in religious freedom to registration is open, and also opportunities for sponsorship are open for that summit. It's really the largest global gathering of religious freedom folks, people who are concerned in one way or another, whether they're academics or religious people who are subject to persecution, political leaders, NGOs. It's a massive gathering, and it's a wonderful contribution to the religious freedom landscape that Katrina and Sam have founded and promoted. To my right is Jan Figeľ. He was the first ever EU Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion and Belief outside the EU. Yesterday evening, we heard from the current holder of that office, and there have only been two. So we have both of them here with us at this symposium, and we're really grateful for that. This is the EU equivalent of the Religious Freedom Ambassador that we have in the United States. You'll recall that last year, Rashad Hussain, who's the current office holder in the United States, was one of our speakers, and previous holders of that office have included Sam Brownback, who is Katrina's co-chair on the Religious Freedom Summit. Jan is a very successful politician from the country of Slovakia, and he was the primary person from Slovakia that negotiated Slovakia's entry into the European Union. And he served as a commissioner of the European Union, focusing on education, and later was, as I said, Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion and Belief. And over the last 7 years, he has become a very close partner with our center in our work promoting religious freedom for all people in all places, and is really the key person that helped us identify human dignity as a topic that was where religious humanists and secular humanists can meet, and where we can build a bridge for religious freedom in places where religious freedom is itself perhaps less understood or even a matter of suspicion. Here I'm thinking specifically of certain parts of Asia, certain parts of Africa, certain parts of the Muslim world. And what we've learned from Jan is that human dignity is uniquely powerful as a bridge building door-opening concept. And we also have with us Brendan O'Hara, who is a member of Parliament. He's filling in for Dr. Ewelina Ochab, who is on a delayed airplane. She'll be here this afternoon. So we'll try to squeeze Ewelina into the program in another spot. But Mr. O'Hara, who is a member of Parliament, who's one of the leaders in the Forb movement in the United Kingdom, has graciously agreed to step in to not only read Ewelina's prepared remarks, but also to contribute his own very valuable perspective on human dignity and the Human Dignity Day initiative. So with that introduction, let me just mention one other thing. We'll run until 11:45, but I have to step out for another engagement, something I have to do at 11:25. So Jan Figeľ is going to take over the chair for this panel when I slip away. I apologize for the disruption of my schedule. I wanted to begin with a question for each of our panelists before I invite them to make their prepared remarks. And then our hope is to really open the floor for discussion. And the question is simply, what does human dignity mean to you as a person, a specific person in your life and from your perspective, with your history, with your philosophical, religious convictions? It's a little perhaps unusual to begin with such a personal question, but that's what we'd like to do. And Katrina, if it's okay, let's just move across the dais and start with you.
Thank you. First, also let me congratulate you, Brett, and Elizabeth, and everybody who has organized this really fantastic symposium, and I'm so honored to be part of it. And I'm excited that you started with such a personal question, because we so often, when we prepare our remarks, think about an academic framework or a philosophical framework or a legal framework, and I like the opportunity to make it very personal. When I think about dignity, the first thing that pops into my mind is my father, as a young Jewish boy in a slave labor camp, being threatened with grave bodily harm and danger if he didn't agree to convert, as a means of sort of burnishing the credentials of the commandant of the barracks he was in. And something in that young boy really made him rebel against this trampling upon his own dignity, his own autonomy, his own right to make such profound conscience decisions for himself. And he didn't. And he was terribly beaten and targeted for that refusal. I think about some of the amazing people that I met during the course of my service, the chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom in very, very difficult parts of the world, also standing with immense dignity and courage by their personal convictions, and really a little bit like that image we have of the tank man in China during Tiananmen Square, standing alone against overwhelming forces that threatened to mow them down, and yet there was a core of dignity there that would not allow them to simply bend the knee. But then when I think about the word dignity, Brett, I also think about people that I don't particularly like or admire, people who may make me uncomfortable, who I may have all sorts of kind of critical judgments about. But nonetheless, I recognize in them something worthy of protection, worthy of a certain kind of universal respect. And so they also come to mind when I think about what the word dignity means, that it is not only an attribute of the virtuous, but something that I do see in all human beings.
Thank you, Katrina. That's really lovely, because, you know, sometimes we think of human dignity of those we admire and love, but it is, and that's totally appropriate. I mean, when Katrina speaks of her father, he was the only Holocaust survivor elected to Congress in the United States, and a champion of human rights, the creator of the Congressional Human Rights Caucus, and a champion of human dignity and human rights through his life, but to also be thinking of the dignity of the other. I'm reminded of a line that Justice Barak from Israel coined in an enemy combatant case, where he said that we must always remember that the terrorist too is in possession of human dignity, and like us, was created by God in his image. And so human dignity does invite us to think about how we treat all people, including those who have done terrible things or who we may think of as enemies. So thank you for not just glamorizing human dignity as an easy thing. It's actually quite a challenging thing. Jan, let me invite you to answer the same question. What does human dignity mean to you?
Yeah, thank you, Brett, for not only the question, but our work for human dignity. I spoke here first time 7 years ago, and I feel part of this ambience and community, and I congratulate you for perseverance, for commitment, for focus. Dignity is extremely important, and to be personal, half of my life I spent in a totalitarian regime without freedom, and half it's with freedom. It's incomparable difference, and to be honest, this name Jan Figeľ belonged in the previous generation to my uncle, young brother of my father, Jan, who was killed by secret services of Stalinist Czechoslovakia. Stalin was still alive and Gottwald was alive, but he didn't survive, and we don't know where he is buried. Some people said he ended in Prague, in Pankratz prison. Some said that he was deported to Gulag in Siberia, and some said that he was killed in the neighborhood. What I want to say that Jan Figeľ, my uncle, paid the price for my freedom. And in totalitarian system, we could study MST or technologies. That's why I am engineer. I am not a lawyer. I don't envy you, but engineering is important, and mathematics, physics, engineering is based on rules and laws and principles. If we don't follow them, building collapse. But we need these rules also in non-material sciences and areas, including law and rule of law. Because many dictators use laws and rules for their dominance, for their governance. But we need laws which respect dignity of all and serve to dignity of all, not some, not majority versus minorities, but for all, because we are all equal in dignity, as well as we are all different in identity. And this great principle is important, so we need to remember, to pay tribute actively, serving to promotion of human dignity. And I think that this conference, this special panel, this initiative, which we will describe a bit more, is a very plausible, noble initiative. So that's why I am here, in the name of my uncle and many victims.
Thank you, Jan. There's a famous story in our faith tradition of a church leader who was very old, and he had a dream, and he was named after his grandfather. And in his dream, his grandfather met him and asked him, "What have you done with my name?" And I hope, Jan, that when you see your Uncle Jan again, it will be a joyful reunion because of the good that you have done with his name. Thank you for sharing that with us. Among many other things that Brendan O'Hara does as a member of Parliament. He is the secretary of the all-party parliamentary group for international freedom of religion or belief. And we're grateful for your leadership in that effort, Mr. O'Hara. Brendan, if I may, what does human dignity mean to you? Not speaking for Ewelina, but speaking for yourself.
I wish you hadn't asked, because I do find this story very difficult to tell, and it's something I don't talk about very often, but I grew up in the East End of Glasgow in the 1960s. It was a very, very poor, very difficult community in which to grow up in. And we were not typical of the community in which we lived in. And I remember we were on a train coming back from an aunt's house, and we're coming through the East End of Glasgow. And this old man got on the train, and he was clearly an alcoholic. He was dirty, he was poor, and we were all horrified when he came and sat beside us. But my dad made us move up, and he sat down, and we talked to this man, and we got to know this man, and it was a lesson in life. And I remember coming off the train, and I said to my dad, why did you do that? And he said, not so long ago, that man was the apple of somebody's eye. That old man that you saw was not always the old man you saw. He was his parents' pride and joy, and people loved him so much. And it was a life lesson, and it's never left me. And I always get very emotional talking about it. And that idea that we can never judge the people we see and the people we meet by the appearance that they give. And every single person that we meet without exception has to be afforded that human dignity. So when I think of human dignity, I often think of that old man that we met on a Glasgow suburban train in the early 1970s, and what he was and how he became what he is, and how, despite the condition he was in, my dad afforded him every respect and every dignity. And it's never left me, and I hope it never does.
Wow. You know, most stories that genuinely resonate are stories about small things that are very particular, and thank you for sharing that. Do you remember how old you were when you had that experience?
9 or 10.
9 or 10 years old,
yeah.
But yeah, I can think of an experience or two that I had at that age that was formative in the way I think about the world and the experiences I have. Well, let me just mention briefly that we have materials to share with you. I think you got these in your registration packet. One is a brochure based upon the Punta del Este Declaration for Human Dignity for Everyone, Everywhere. And we have it in several different languages. I have Spanish here and English. And on the website, dignityforeveryone.org, you'll find that in about a dozen languages. And this is part of the Human Dignity Initiative that we've been working on with Jan Figeľ. The second thing that I hope you received in your packet is this book. It's a coffee table book called Points of Light. And it includes quotations from about 100 of the signatories of the Punta del Este Declaration about what human dignity means to them. And those are the points of light in the title of the book. And this was a book that Jan Figeľ co-authored with my colleague Jane Wise and me. We've put a few extra copies of both of these in the front of this room. And if you'd like to take an extra copy for a colleague or a friend, please come and pick those up. I hope they'll all disappear, because then we won't have to carry them back up to the office. So now I'd like to turn to the prepared remarks. Let's just go in reverse order. Brendan, let me ask you to share what Ewelina had prepared to share with this group here this morning.
Sure. Obviously, Dr. Ewelina Ochab sends her apologies. Her flight has been delayed, and she will be here later. So she's asked me to deliver this on her behalf. So what we have is a Polish person stuck in Germany writing in English for a Scottish person to read to you. What could possibly go wrong? So Dr. Ochab says, it is an honour to be back at BYU, the place where my journey with the project on human dignity began, the work in the Punta del Este Declaration on Human Dignity for Everyone, Everywhere. One declaration later, one explanatory book later, I've now arrived at this project of establishing a UN Day on Human Dignity. Before I explain the project and some of the work being done on the topic, I wanted to briefly explain my interest in the topic. And for many of you, you will not be surprised to find that the answer is genocide. Genocide does not just happen. It requires preparation. It requires planning. And it requires steps to deny the human dignity of every individual before that translates into the denial of rights and then into persecution and annihilation of a whole community. Soldiers and armies do not just go in to slaughter other people. Before this is possible, one has to deny the human dignity of every individual, present them as vermin or animals or less than human in order to enable the atrocity. Of course, there's a long way between the denial of human dignity and genocide, but there's a very clear link that we've been observing across genocides across the world, across the decades. One will not be able to bring about a genocide without the denial of human dignity and every person belonging to that targeted group. I raised this issue when I spoke at the BYU Symposium back in 2018, following some of the worst atrocities we've witnessed, perpetrated against the Yazidis in Iraq, against the Rohingya in Myanmar, and Christians in Nigeria. But it did not stop there. In 2020, we witnessed horrific atrocities against the Uyghurs in China, against the Tigrayans in Ethiopia, and in 2021, a new wave of atrocities in Darfur. In 2022, the war in Ukraine, and in 2023, in Nagorno-Karabakh. And all these atrocities which are currently ongoing, the perpetrators deny the very human dignity of every individual, and that translates them into being targeted atrocities against those communities. Sometimes as we talk about atrocities perpetrated against whole communities en masse, we forget about the individual and how the atrocities affect them. The focus on human dignity can help us balance that and ensure that we do not forget the individual suffering among the mass atrocities. Similarly, as we work in human rights, we must always ask ourselves about the impact on the human dignity of the individuals involved. There can be no success of the project of human rights if it is detached from the focus on human dignity or it loses track of the impact on human dignity. And we were working on the Punta del Este Declaration on Human Dignity. We were approaching the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights and the 70th anniversary of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. Now we are approaching the 75th anniversary of these important documents, and the situation globally is not improving. Indeed, quite to the contrary, it is going backwards. As we approach the 75th anniversary, together with Brett and Jan and Mark Hill, we have been discussing how to revive the focus on human dignity and with this proactive approach. Again, in relation to atrocity crime, most of the work done is reactive rather than proactive. We respond to atrocities as they're perpetrated. This is true whether we talk about international bodies or state responses. We act because bodies are seen in the street, not because we saw the propaganda with the risk of mass atrocities. We act because millions of people were being displaced, not because they were denied their citizenship and persecuted. This is not the way forward. We must invest in more proactive approaches. Proactive approaches are rare. However, proactive approaches are the only way to prevent atrocities and to stop the suffering of people around the world. In relation to atrocity crime, such proactive approaches would mean having a mechanism for monitoring early warning systems and risk factors and strategies for responding to signs and risks. In relation to human dignity, such proactive approaches would mean, among others, having designated time to focus on human dignity and how our actions or inactions affect it. This is how the project to establish the UN Day on Human Dignity was born. The UN is often too focused on reactive responses to human rights violations and plays too little attention to proactive responses. Let us have a day in the year when we focus on human dignity every year without waiting for something bad to happen. And if anyone thinks that we do not need yet another day, please remember that most of us here speak from a place of safety and a place of privilege. Many people do not have that privilege. The privilege of safety, the privilege of having human rights guaranteed. And that should not be a privilege for the few, but a guarantee for all of us. I thank you for your attention, and I will be happy to discuss further when I arrive at the symposium later today. If you enjoyed that speech, my name is Brendan O'Hara. If you didn't, my name is Dr. Ewelina Ochab.
Brendan, to an American ear, there is very little in the world that is as lovely as a Scottish brogue. And you gave absolute dignity and just delivered that message in a beautiful way. You know, it's interesting, we've been doing this symposium for a long time, but there are phrases and lines that get stuck in your mind. And one of those in my mind was Ewelina saying in 2018 that genocide requires effort, it requires planning, and it requires organization. Sometimes we think of these terrible things as just spontaneous spasms of emotion, but it actually takes a lot of work, a lot of effort, and a lot of organization to do it, to do that awful work. And I am grateful that that was echoed here once again 5 years later at the symposium through your participation. Jan, let me turn the floor to you.
Yeah, thank you, Brett. Maybe I will add spontaneously to this genocidal issue or effort that again and again, in spite of our historical promise, never again, this is subtitle of Anti-Genocide Convention, never again. Reality is again. This year's now, I was nominated to the position of first ever special envoy in time of genocide in Syria and in Iraq, 2016, which started 2014. So again and again, and we learn a little or even do not learn from history. And why? Because evil has such terrible, bloody, visible impact because it has very efficient, omnipresent, distributed allies everywhere, in my country, in this country, in your countries. 3 siblings are very efficient in support of evil: indifference, ignorance, and fear. If we don't care what's going on because it's far away or it's not in my neighborhood, if we don't know, don't understand what's going on in the world, and if we are scared to say something, to do something. I said this message in 2016 here, and I repeated it. We need to educate, to stand up, not in my name, never again. Otherwise, 21st century will be business as usual, which means repetition of horrors of 20th century. And I mean it. I mentioned in the card this morning that I deal with the situation in its neighborhood. Ukraine is our neighbor. 3 European wars in 20th century started in Europe and became global. We have again war there, and escalation is going on. So this was rather an addendum to what I wanted to say on on this important theme, you can at least join those who support human dignity for everyone, everywhere. On the last page of this nice brochure is address dignityforeveryone.org, where everyone can add signature. There are hundreds and hundreds of signatories from different fields: religion, politics, academia, media, civil society. Please join those who are like-minded. History is made by creative minorities. We shouldn't be afraid that we are not, thousands here. But be active, be creative. Minority which cares. And majority will add. This is then called revolution. Mental or other revolution, but we need creative minorities. What I wanted to say is that we need to move further since times of awakening or post-war call for dignity to culture of human dignity, which is much more. Ireland in 1937, small country, was the first which had or included dignity in the constitution. During Second World War, there were only five countries with this notion in the constitution. Now we have more than 160 constitutions worldwide claiming dignity, including India, if you read Indian preamble, including, of course, Germany after Second World War. And that's a good shift. But it's not enough if we see what's going on. We need to go deeper. And this was my point when we met with Brad and Cole in January 2018, discussing other issue on equality in the world of today, or international law and equality. My message was we need to dig deeper, and deeper is dignity, because when we speak only about rights, and even when we tend to forget, or we forget, not only tend to, but really forget, duties, human obligations, brotherhood. This is not language from my church, it's language from the UDHR, secular language, calling us for behaving in spirit of brotherhood. Then how can we move? One-sided coins are false coins, fake. Why dignity? There are several reasons why I would like to support and to invite you to promote this initiative, to have UN Dignity Day. Because dignity is more than rights only. It is promotion of human rights for all. Majorities, minorities, senior, junior, east, west, north, south. But human dignity is source of my rights and my duties as father, as husband, as citizen towards my country. Not many statesmen, yes, but there are not many now. Not many politicians mention human obligations, human dignity, responsibility to protect, principle of the United Nations, responsibility to protect. And therefore we have these tragedies and repetitions of atrocities and inhumanity and fratricide. Dignity is road to for all, to freedom of religion or belief to all. Because when you compare Article 1 and Article 18 on religious freedom, they are almost identical, I would say, in principle, in scope. I will quote Article 1, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason, conscience, and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. And Article 18 speaks about the title of this symposium, freedom of reason, of thought, of conscience, and religion. 3 in 1, not only one. We must keep these 3 in together or jointly, because they describe three human dimensions of each human being, that we are all rational, moral, and religious or spiritual. Religious freedom is important for non-believers, for atheists, for all, from A to Z, from atheists to Zoroastrians, if this is correctly understood. So these two articles speaks about the dimensional human person, human being, and therefore I would like to stress this importance because there is a deep and strong nexus between religious freedom and human dignity. Religious freedom articulated is a litmus test of all human rights. Because if this deepest expression of human freedom is not respected, do you think that government or dictator will respect freedom of expression, of opinion, of press, of assembly, of... Second, human rights and human duties stem from our dignity, and we need to care about both sides of one coin. UDHR, 75th anniversary now, contains two duties, 30 articles of rights, but there are two duties. In Article 1, brotherhood, spirit of brotherhood, and Article 29, duties towards community which we live in. Everybody lives in community. Nobody is isolated island, nobody. So duties. This is balance, this is maturity. The third principle is equal dignity, which is spoken by the international law, is a moral and ethical principle and should be translated into socio-political principle of equal citizenship, which is ideal still in many parts of the world. Equal citizenship. And we need it everywhere for dignity of everyone. Fourth one is this spirit of brotherhood and sisterhood, which means we are one human family. This is used usually in churches, brothers and sisters, in religions. And we need to translate this occasional or Sunday or festive title into practical mentality. We are all equal in dignity, which means we are all one family, sisters, brothers. And the last point which I wanted to say as additional or added value, and Brett mentioned it, this should be and can be a meeting point for humanists, whether they come from religious angle or point of view, or from secular point of view. If they are humanists, they will meet at the dignity of each person. And from common word or common ground, we can get to common good. It is not only imaginable, it's realistic road from common ground to common good. And I conclude by saying that a culture of human dignity can be built if we care about both legs or both principles, which I like to mention because they are the most ancient ethical principles. People understood it long time ago in the whole history, what means equality or equal dignity. It's silver and golden ethical principle. The silver says, don't do the others what you don't want others to do unto you. Very simple, reciprocal, fair. And the golden one, which is expression of human solidarity, human love, says, do unto others what you want others to do unto you. And on these two principles, we really can build culture of human dignity and achieve more humane 21st century. Thank you. Katrina, please, floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Well, I want to commend my two fellow panelists. I think they've both spoken so powerfully and eloquently, and in some ways, the more practical level of how we try to translate this underlying concept of human dignity into a way to fight against the evils we see all around us. I have taken a somewhat different approach because, as we know, this is a gathering discussing the importance of freedom of religion, conscience, and belief. And I believe that it is really on the remarkable ground of human dignity that we see most clearly the bridge that connects the battle for religious freedom to the broader human rights movement. And actually, as we sort of cross that bridge, we begin to see that without a robust defense of freedom of religion and belief, there really is no intellectually coherent basis for the entire human rights project, which we've been talking about. Now, I was thinking about the best way to illustrate this idea, and I thought I would do it by posing to you the same sort of intriguing, I hope slightly challenging intellectual inquiry that I present to my students at Tufts University in the course that I teach on human rights and American foreign policy. What we try to do at the outset of the course is delve a little more deeply into the idea behind the idea. You've heard us all invoke dignity over and over again. You're probably going to hear it more in the course of this conference, and it's the basis for this wonderful initiative, which I'm very strongly supportive of. But if you read a lot in the literature about human rights, there tends to be kind of a wrestling with what we mean by dignity. That was Brett's first question to us, but he asked us to answer it in a very personal way. What do you feel? What comes to your mind when you think about the word dignity? But in a more abstract sense, people do struggle with this idea. What is dignity? It's the foundation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's woven into the foundation of the architecture of the whole human rights movement. But what does it really mean? Well, I, at the start of my course, give my students 3 different articles to read, and it's quite entertaining in a way for me to see them struggle with these articles because they basically pose the question to these very bright young students: can the notion, the idea of innate, inherent, fundamental, inalienable human dignity be sustained without some reference to a transcendent belief system, without a belief in something greater, someone greater than ourselves? So I give them these 3 articles. One is titled Undignified Bioethics, and it basically urges that we abandon the inherent dignity standard altogether. The author of that one is a gentleman by the name of Cochrane. The second article is called The Bioethics Threat to Universal Human Rights. And this author, whose name is Wesley Smith, argues very passionately that no, we need to hold on to the notion of inherent dignity, but we need to do it on purely secular grounds and without invoking any sort of transcendent ideas. And then the third author, by the name of Blackburn, his article is titled Evolution, Human Dignity and Crafting Public Policy, argues for maintaining this idea of dignity, but recognizing that at some level, it does take us to a more transcendent place. So what are some of their key arguments? Well, of course, the most outrageous I'm being very editorializing, I guess. The most provocative, let me use the word provocative instead, come from Mr. Cochrane, who basically, first of all, has no patience at all for the idea of dignity as referring to virtuous behavior. He says that on the one hand, that version of dignity is either too trivial, it means you're well behaved, you have good manners, you know how to keep your self-control, much too trivial, or on the other hand, way too demanding. The sort of dignity that asks us to maintain our moral principles at high cost, to endure suffering with courage. Those kinds of dignity he doesn't like either. He says, come on, losing self-control, wallowing in self-pity, those are perfectly legitimate responses to life. So he doesn't like that idea of dignity. And then he turns his attention to the idea of dignity as inherent moral worth, that because people possess this inherent moral worth, we can't do whatever we want to them. And in fact, we actually might have some moral obligations towards them. Now, he freely acknowledges that this idea of dignity, which is what we've all been kind of talking about up here, is absolutely the basis for universal human rights. It's stated in the preamble to the Universal Declaration and really throughout all the modern documents. But he argues, and he says, and I love this phrase, you guys will probably want to put this away, file this away. He says that idea of human dignity, this inherent human dignity, makes, quote, noblemen of us all. And of course, looking out on this audience, I see a gathering of noble men and noble women, so I like that idea. But he doesn't like it, and the reason is that he says the only possible, credible reason for suggesting that humans have inherent moral worth is a religious one, namely that they are made in the image of God. To quote him, he says, all and only human beings possess dignity because all and only human beings are in this special relationship with God. Now, I happen to be a dog owner, so I don't agree that all and only human beings have dignity. In fact, I'm more of the Mark Twain school of thought. I think he said something to the effect that he sort of only wants to go to the heaven that dogs are admitted to, because that's where all the good people go. But he says that this point of view that says humans uniquely have this inherent dignity, if you follow the string back far enough, it is going to lead you to some version of the belief that we are made, and from the very instant of our birth, we bear an image that imbues us with that dignity. He doesn't like that. He says it privileges a religious viewpoint, and it kind of constrains our ability to make more calculating and more pragmatic policy decisions. He also rejects the notion advanced by Immanuel Kant that one of the characteristics of human beings is that they must never ever be treated as a means to an end, but only as an end in and of themselves. These ideas trouble him, they bother him, and he rejects them. And he says, at the end of the day, we need to purge this idea of human dignity, not only from the field of bioethics, which he's specifically addressing, but more broadly from human rights. Well, now as you can imagine, many, many people reacted in horror to this kind of notion because they can see, we're not dumb. We can kind of see where that thinking leads. And so one response that came was from this gentleman, Wesley Smith, who correctly said, if we reject the idea of human exceptionalism, then the whole principle of universal human rights is likely to buckle. He talks about a growing divide between the equality and sanctity view of life, which would be sort of that inherent dignity view of life, versus the quality of life view of life, and sees in some senses the sanctity and equality view waning and the quality of life view beginning to gain ascendancy. But what does that mean if we evaluate people's worthiness for rights, their dignity, based on sort of quality of life considerations, things like minimum intelligence, self-awareness, self-control, sense of futurity, memory, their ability to communicate, sort of a number of capacities that everybody in this room has, but not everybody has. Well, the author says, what does that mean for the most vulnerable among us? What does that mean for us as we begin bit by bit to lose some of those qualities and attributes. The implications of this sort of an approach are very, very grave for those of us who seek to defend the fundamental rights of all people. However, this author says that we have to nonetheless reject the idea that only a metaphysical understanding of human nature can ever justify the idea of inherent and equal dignity of all people. We have to support this idea based on secular grounds. So what does he look to? Well, he has an interesting argument. He says that the argument for human exceptionalism can be advanced on the grounds that, as far as we know, only humans are hardwired to be moral beings. He says the words ought to can only ever issue from a human being. An interesting thought, I hope one you'll chew on as the day goes on. And because of this, because of what he describes as the sort of hardwiring of a moral sense in human beings, that can be the basis on which we sustain this notion of dignity. He argues forcefully that there can be no compromise or retreat from the essential commitment to human dignity, but that we must refuse to sort of base it on a higher transcendent association. So the third of these articles by Ross Blackburn basically argues that secular arguments alone just can't do the heavy lifting. He counters some of Wesley Smith's arguments by asking, if human dignity is located in humanity's moral capacity and character, the fact that we're uniquely wired to be moral beings, then why is it that we remain entitled to that dignity when those characteristics are missing due to immaturity, to disability, to illness? Why should specific individuals be considered members of the moral human community if they lack those capacities or if they have shown that they absolutely reject and trample upon those capacities? He basically says, look, you're making a very good argument, but you're basically making a religious argument and you're just saying it's a secular argument. You're just asserting that, but you're not really backing it up. And he acknowledges, of course, that an assumption about the existence of God is a presupposition, that it just sort of assumes certain things. But he suggests to the other author that not God is also a presupposition, that both of them are in some senses, falsifiable and non-falsifiable, and that they share in common the fact that they are a presupposition. He also asks a question, again, if you completely remove transcendence out of the human equation, he sort of asks the other author to explain to him, how was it that morality evolved from a very immoral process of survival of the fittest? So you assert that human beings uniquely contain this moral hardwiring, but how do you explain its existence? How did that come to be? Because on a purely evolutionary basis, it's a pretty brutal and amoral process of survival of the fittest. So I throw these articles into the laps of my students, and then I ask them, what do you think? Do you subscribe to any one of these three categories? Does one of them ring true to you? And what is so interesting for me is that in the I would say, very, very secular world of a modern American liberal arts university, where probably 85% of my students would themselves identify as having, not only no faith tradition that they're following, but really no beliefs based on faith. It's quite interesting to see, somewhat uncomfortably, them saying, well, I don't like it, but I sort of feel like that third guy has the strongest argument, that you're more likely to build a society, to build a future, that genuinely seeks to honor the dignity, the inherent, inalienable, fundamental, and individual dignity of every human being. If it is tied to something greater than just the ideas we circulate amongst ourselves. So I throw those ideas out for you today, as I say, in the hopes of sort of shining a light on what I see as a very important bridge between a world that I've devoted a lot of my energy to, namely fighting for the conscience rights, the freedom of religion, conscience, and belief for everyone, everywhere, all the time. And that absolutely includes our friends who are non-believers, who are humanists, who are atheists. But that bridge, I think, to the defense of freedom of religion and belief and the broader human rights movement, for me, comes into greater focus and greater clarity when I realize that the keystone, you can either call it the keystone in the arch or the foundation stone of the entire human rights project, rests on human dignity. And human dignity has to rest on something. It has to rest on something. We can't just say, well, we pulled it out of the air. And speaking for myself, I do believe that inherent dignity, when I spoke in my opening observation and said how dignity also makes me think about the fact that even those I don't like, those I don't admire, those who I may think are doing terrible things, I still see something in them that must be called human dignity and that must be defended. For me, at least, that does come from an age-old notion shared in many, many faith traditions, that we are made in the image of something greater than ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrina, for your very open, sincere sharing of conviction, but also these 3 articles or 3 views on the same topic. I think we will not find precise, exhaustive definition, but we will find a lot if we deal with human dignity, and therefore initiative to have international, global UN Day of Human Dignity is very reasonable initiative. It's linked with the current session of the United Nations General Assembly. We as so-called, I would say, or we will label it as advocacy committee. We work with several like-minded or willing countries. It's not a secret, it's Uruguay. Punta del Este is the most eastern place in the Western Hemicycle in Uruguay. So it's Uruguay, Indonesia, Ghana, Kenya, hopefully Slovakia, Poland, and then some others around this core group. And we hope, I speak on behalf of the advocacy committee, we hope to succeed within the current season of the UN General Assembly session. There was a great academic conference in Oxford, in Schmolian Museum, 3-day conference with people from academia, but also religious circles, political, diplomatic, civil society, with common stand or position at the end adopted as a declaration of the Oxford Conference, supporting this initiative. And therefore, I feel not only encouraged, but simply now also in position to invite you all to know about it, to share it, to support it. Of course, each on your position or way different towards the government which is representing you as a citizen, or even there are some mandate holders. I think it's our common cause. It's not just, for few or philosophers. It's a cause for more humane 21st century, and it is intrinsically linked with understanding and respect to human dignity of all and for all. So I think we are over the time. If there are, of course, some special personal questions, please feel encouraged to contact us or to speak to us now in the break, and then we have lunch. And we will continue, of course, during these days here in Provo. Thank you. Thanks, Katrina. Thanks, Brendan. And also Brett Scharffs, who is left. Thank you all.
Thank you.